Well, it's January 6th, 2025, and a warm welcome to everybody as you climb on board with this important discussion live on Leaders on the Frontier. And we're so grateful for everybody joining in on this conversation today about the state of Canada vis-a-vis our trading relationships and what's going on with our most important trading partner and friend, the United States of America. So there's a lot of things going on, and good afternoon to you, Prairie, as well. We're so glad that we have a faithful regular of so many parties. And yes, it is February the 6th. Laugh out loud, exactly. So February the 6th, 2025, the year of our Lord. So we have a lot going on. I'm very excited about the panel that we're going to introduce in a moment to talk about Canada and how did we get in this pickle with the United States as Donald Trump talks about 25% tariff and 10% on Canadian energy, and then backs off, and we're in a situation is frankly a historic challenge, but is it also an opportunity to get our policy house in order? So that's kind of the thought of the day. So there's some headlines that I did want to underline that I think are very interesting and related to our topic. I'm curious what your thoughts are. But today we heard in the BOE report, the Barrel of Energy report, which I faithfully read every day, is that Canada's province of Alberta is eyeing Japan for new liquefied natural gas or LNG deals amid the U.S. tariff threat. The minister says, it says, given what we've seen in the United States, this is reinforcement that we need to diversify our export markets, and Japan, our already existing relationship, is going to be a key area of focus, as Minister Rebecca Schultz said in an interview in Tokyo yesterday on Wednesday. So go figure. So there's a comment from Perry there that says, I don't believe this has anything to do with the border. Okay, well, we'll come back to that in a moment. And speaking of the border, you may have noticed that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, said yesterday that there was one migrant tragically died and 9 more detained in different illegal crossings in Canada, including, I believe it was 2 in Alberta and 1 in Manitoba. So what's going on there? There's also calls by a number of parties, including the leader of the opposition, calling for mandatory life sentences for fentanyl kingpins. So what do you think about that? So last week we had quite an animated discussion with Catherine Swift from an Alliance of Manufacturers. And I did highlight in the program there one of the comments made just last week by the governor of the Bank of Canada saying a trade war would be painful between the United States and Canada. And it was certainly Tiff Macklin, the governor, who said, we produce and earn less than without tariffs, said Macklin. Monetary policy cannot offset this. So we're in a vulnerable position. And I think the facts are that we're fighting with a giant of a trading partner. So I think that's some of the themes that have been highlighted by a number of people, including at Frontier, with a commentary and analysis by a member of our panel, Dr. Navarro-Genie, who said that Canada stands to lose a lot if we get into a trade war with the United States. So we all agree that we love this country, Canada. We believe it's an incredible nation. And this is a historic moment in our nation's history as we look at what path are we going to take? How are we going to manage our relationship with the United States? And there's a lot going on. So just to set the stage very quickly before we get on with the panel, we've got a number of issues, and we're going to probe them more deeply and peel away the perennial onion in terms of what's happening, what are the impacts that this kind of tariff has, but really talk about how is this an opportunity to get our policy house in order. We heard, again, that at the last moment, the threat of 25% tariffs was taken away for now. There was a deferral of some 30 days, and that includes the 10% levy or tariff on energy. So we had this reprieve. We have an understanding according to the Prime Minister, that there will be a border czar. Certainly, Premier Daniel Smith of Alberta had proposed that Canada get more serious about the border. So that's kind of where we're at today. And there's certainly a lot of other points of information, but that's the brief summary. So I wanted to continue this important conversation. And so we put together, I think, a very exciting panel. And I want to introduce Ron Koslowsky. And Ron is very much involved in the larger business community. He's recently retired from as president of the Manitoba manufacturers, exporters for Manitoba. So a warm welcome to you, Ron.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to introduce Rob Anderson, who's the president of St. Boniface Pallet. A warm welcome to you, Rob.
Hello, everybody.
Hi. And then I have Dr. Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, Vice President of Policy and Research at Frontier. Welcome, Marco.
Thank you.
So I want to begin with you, Ron. Are you concerned about the impacts that we could see as a nation if we look at a 25% tariff on manufacturers? You've been working with manufacturers right across the country, certainly Manitoba. What's your thought on that?
Well, there's no question this is a massive impact on us, and I think we saw this coming. We should have been doing things to prepare for this, but like you said before, this is an opportunity and a wake-up call, and I liken it really to us having lived for years, decades, as a sort of an entitled teenager living in the home of his parents and not being responsible. And now we are being told you got to move out. And we've focused on all the other things apart from the basics that we need to move on. And now we're going to have to learn some of those basics and become self-reliant. So you can think of over 15 areas where we have just simply not done what we needed to do over the last decades.
Okay, so that's fascinating, Ron. So big impact, but it's interesting you use the analogy, the metaphor of that perhaps Canada's been like an entitled teenager living in the home of our parents. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, apart from the obvious of the military, leadership that the U.S. has, that we can basically spend nothing and live under no fear whatsoever. They've looked after global institutions, but a lot more than that. They've provided a wonderful marketplace for us. They've had to listen to our constant moralizing and talking about how great we are and how progressive we are and how much we do for peacekeeping and so on, while we've gutted our military, as an example. But there's just so many ways in which I think the Americans now can look to us, and have probably for many years. I think we're just actually having an administration that's actually saying what a lot of Americans have thought for many years, that no.
Okay, very interesting. And I can see why you use that metaphor of a spoiled teenager. So maybe we need to, in keeping with that theme, grow up. So Rob Anderson, it's so great to see you. What is your sense of the impacts of this? So you run a significant business in St. Boniface, a pallet company. Can you tell us more about what would this mean for you and your firm?
Yeah, I mean, our customer base are manufacturers of various goods, and we're providing wood packaging to be able to ship those goods all over the world. So if you have a customer base that's reliant on export, and those exports start to dwindle, that obviously has a pretty big impact on our business. So you can run various scenarios through your head about what might happen, and could some of the slack that used to go into the U.S. be picked up by other parts of Canada or other parts of the world? And yes, maybe some of that, but I think the vast majority of the business that would be lost would be essentially irreplaceable.
Okay. And I know, Rob, you care very deeply about, your team, your employees, and certainly the community. Sure. So this would, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Rob, but this would have a major impact on your business.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, the timeline would be the only part that I would have trouble sort of figuring out as to how long all this would take to play out. But certainly over a period of time, we would see less employment, less sales, less revenue. You know, again, it would be very difficult to replace. I mean, one of the concerns I have is that, you know, yes, the tariffs have been postponed, but has some of the damage already been done? You know,
And what do you mean by that, Rob?
well, if you were going to build a $1 billion plant, and you had plans to put it into Manitoba, or North Dakota, you'd now, I think, be somewhat foolish to consider Manitoba. You'd only do it if the government were to step in and provide some sort of significant subsidy situation. But if it were apples for apples, I think you'd want to put it inside the U.S. just to be safe. And so
Okay, so you're looking at this as a business leader, and you're saying these kinds of interrelationships or challenges, the threat of tariffs, really creates uncertainty, which is deadly for confident investment in the community. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, tough to make a decision to spend a lot of money on a capital investment that's going to require 10 or 20 years to see a return, not knowing where things are going to be in 4 or 5 years, let alone 10 or 20.
Exactly.
If I could just add to that, absolutely correct. But in addition to that, you have to remember this has been something that I've heard from manufacturing leaders and other leaders for a long time already before the tariff wars. And that speaks to other issues related to taxation, competitiveness, your regulatory costs, the carbon taxes, other things that have made it more difficult. And I've heard many manufacturing leaders talking about at least expanding in the U.S., if not, in fact, moving. But it does definitely speak to the investment and the issues related to Canada's declining investment levels.
Indeed. So those policies, Ron, as you've outlined, from really soup to nuts, whether it is taxes or all kinds of attitudes, really underline, and I'm not trying to sound dramatic, but it seems to me that, I mean, I hear this regularly. I used to be the CEO of a large chamber of commerce, is that in Canada, generally, most governments are quite hostile to business. They're not enabling business to succeed or grow, but they frankly, through red tape and all kinds of regulations, really seek to undermine it. Am I being too harsh about that, Rob and Ron?
Well, not from my perspective. The stories I hear about companies that go to the U.S. and are courted by states and cities over there with unbelievable opportunities to have training paid for, tax reductions on property taxes, and a number of other things related to making it very attractive, in addition to having an attitude from government that is welcoming and looks at honestly ways in which they can improve the environment and the business climate for innovation and for growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is this is a time for a little bit of humbling introspection as a country. How do we work to grow our economy and all kinds of agendas? So on that note, I want to turn to Marco and ask you, what do you think are the potential impacts of this kind of tariff, and what does this mean for us? How do you put this into perspective, Marco?
I really liked the analogy of the teenager, but I think of it in Canadian terms. I think of it as, imagine our national hockey team knowing that we're on our way to the Olympics. And we have spent our time, instead of training hard and getting our physical condition and our hockey skills up to snuff to go and battle the Swedes and the Russians and the Czechs and what have you, we decide that we're going to put all our efforts into making sure that everyone has pink skates, and we have rainbow jackets, and all kinds of intersectional things that have absolutely nothing to do with hockey. So transplant that to the economy, and that's where we're at, right? As has been pointed out by the other guests, Canada is in a terrible competitive situation in relation not just to the United States, but really to the rest of the world. Our productivity is really in the hole. We have absolutely asphyxiating regulations of all different kinds. We have taxes that other people don't have, et cetera, et cetera. All these things essentially amount to shackling our players and preventing them from getting into shape to get into the arena on the ice with the international bigwigs. Let's say. So what do we need to do? Well, we're going to get creamed. Right. So the moment we got on the ice and we got the first person coming at us and cross-checked us, we started crying that, oh my God, they're playing really rough. But that's the game, right? And so what do we need to do in economic terms is we need to correct all the things that have led to this situation. Whining isn't going to get us anywhere because it never does. And so we need to get back to the gym, so to speak. We need to get back on the ice and train hard, make sure that our competitiveness, is up, that our dollar has greater strength, that our fiscal situation is in order. There is a lot of work to do. And we're going to miss this Olympics, let's say. But there is always another one. So we need to get back to the basics.
So there you have it. Another analogy is hockey. We've got the teenagers in the bedroom complaining and whining, and we've got to get our work together as we prepare for the next round and in the next period. Do you think that's an apropos metaphor, Rob?
Yeah, for sure. I certainly do. Metaphors are a great way of sort of thinking through a problem and finding a solution. I look at the Make America Great Again slogan, and I kind of feel like we're going through what I would describe as the MGSA, which is Make Government Sweat Again.
Okay.
And so, the government in some respect is getting a taste of its own medicine right now. This is what it feels like to be a business in Canada, where you kind of feel like you're on pins and needles all the time, and you never know what's going to get thrown at you next. Well, Trudeau and his cohorts, welcome to the club. This is how it feels. This is how you guys have treated us for most of my career.
So that's interesting, Rob. You refer to that sense of treatment, because I will certainly never forget when the Prime Minister a number of years ago said that small business were tax cheats. Do you remember that? And am I misreading that? Was that a significant moment among many others that said, we really don't see you as foundational to building this country?
Yeah, certainly that moment, and also the one that really sticks with me. And I mean, it all depends on age and stage, but certainly the last round of increases that went through on personal tax rates that bumped a lot of provinces up over that 50% mark. I can remember Manitoba being, I think the top tax rate was 46% for a number of years, and as a young kid, I looked at that and I was like, geez, that's almost half, but like, there's no way it's ever going to get any worse. Like this is the worst it could possibly be. I must have just been born at the wrong time. And, it's obviously going to come back down over time because this is crazy. And, here we are, and it's gotten nothing but worse.
So I'm talking with a wonderful panel here, and I see the audience jumping on board with a lot of questions. I'm talking with Ron Koslowsky, has worked with many manufacturers, and Rob Anderson, president of St. Boniface Pallet, as well as Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie with Vice President of Research at Frontier. And it's very interesting, again, the continuation of analogies. I think, Prairie, you mentioned earlier the whole point of, here's a question that you're posing. If Trump believes that the U.S. is getting ripped off by Canada, do you think he'll stop with the border issue? Well, that's a good question. And it begs the question, what's really going on here? Does anyone want to tackle that question? Any thoughts on that, Marco?
Sure. Part of the problem is that we have not, when I say we, I mean our political leaders, do not seem to have assessed the situation properly. And we're sort of complaining that Trump is being mean, that he's not treating us like the friends that we are and deserve to be treated better, and a whole bunch of things that are really unrelated to what is going on. And what is going on, the border is one issue, but the border is only a manifestation of something greater going on, which is that President Trump has come back to office this has only happened once in the history of the United States before. And we should remember that when Trump became president before, he had a transformational agenda. And he was blocked by the bureaucracy, by the unions, by a whole bunch of sets of obstacles that that did not allow him to move as quickly as he wanted to. He spent the subsequent 4 years, he and many people in the movement, there is a movement behind him, thinking through how are we going to do things when we arrive, knowing that there is going to be a significant number of obstacles. And so they arrive and they mean business and they mean transformation. They have 4 years to do it and they're not going to waste any time. That's part of the background that we seem to be missing, in part because as it was pointed earlier, we have this sort of teenage mentality. We live in this woke culture. And wokeness does not seek to understand the other. Woke culture simply complains about the other and reacts in sort of negative ways. And so we're kind of stuck in that rut. But there's nothing whimsical about what Trump is doing. There is a very established plan of where they want to get the United States from where it is to where they mean to put it in 4 years. And that means back at the head of the list of nations in the world. They mean to reestablish their economy. And I mean, it's not that they're trying to be mean to Canadians. Trump was not elected to be nice to Canadians. Trump was not elected to be nice to anyone. Trump was elected to set the American course back on its historical tracks. And that's what he's doing.
Okay, so you're kind of challenging us, Marco, to think beyond, dare I say, the superficial headlines and look at carefully understanding where the Make America Great movement is coming from. Because often in the media, I just heard it, it's a steady drumbeat that Donald Trump is still kind of like this fascist dictator who kind of runs things off the side of his desk, and he's entirely unpredictable, and somehow we don't know what's up or down. But it kind of ignores the idea that there is a larger strategy and plan and a much larger team, whether you agree with them or not, that is working, how do we say, a set of goals to kind of rebuild the United States, including the middle class that has seen millions of jobs being frankly exported to other countries, including China. Is that what you're getting at?
Absolutely. Look, leave it to the guy from Nicaragua to keep going the hockey metaphor. But if we think in terms of hockey again, Canada is horribly worried and concentrating on when the puck is going to drop, because the puck hasn't dropped, by the way. The tariffs are not in place. They're only saying that they're going to have tariffs. So it's a threat. So we're concentrating on where the puck is going to drop. And the Americans are already thinking where the puck is going to be and how we're going to put it in the net. There is a larger strategy. They want to win the game. They don't want to necessarily win the face-off.
Okay. So what do you think, Ron?
Absolutely. I think the world has changed. And you see that all over the world, quite frankly, now with leaders that have taken back, if you will, the average interest or the interests of the average person and said, we need to start doing what's good for our own country. Nationalism, it's been portrayed negatively. But honestly, the globalist push is over, and including a lot of the global free trade, as Lighthizer said in the U.S., no trade is free. And he's written a book. If you really want to understand what they're looking at, read his book. Read Stephen Miran, who's put out a user's guide to restructuring the global trading system. They're on a plan. And they understand. They see that in some ways the U.S. has been disadvantaged and taken advantage of by currency manipulations and a variety of other things. And they're ready to set that straight now and to be USA first. We need a Make Canada Great strategy. And I think that has to include a whole bunch of things, including getting rid of some of our misguided policies. And like I said about the teenagers, not focusing on higher end peripheral things rather than focusing on the core fundamental things that create wealth and that create opportunity and a future for our young people.
Very good. I should just clarify, Ron, when you refer to Robert Lighthizer, he's certainly one of the lead trade negotiators that was with the previous Trump administration. He's certainly in play now in Trump 2.0.
Yes.
And he was actually around with the Reagan administration, as I recall. And I think the other party that you mentioned is the chief of the Economic Council of U.S. Advisors. So there's a lot of thought going into this, as much as people think it's just all a Trump tweet. It's not that simple. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's not just about tariffs either, by the way. I mean, when we look at trade, for example, in Canada, we have been smug in terms of developing our own interprovincial trade barriers, for example, which are a big drain on our own ability to trade with each other. It's easier in some cases to trade, to go and sell to the Americans than it is to sell to somebody in another province, depending on what the product and the process is. So we've done that. We've built supply management systems which are protectionist at the heart, and I think we've really not learned how to develop our own export beyond the U.S. because it's a low dollar. It's made it very easy for us to play with the Americans. So, but as we've said, now is the time for us to do what we should have done 30, 40 years ago, is to build our own reliance. And quite frankly, I like the way Alberta's premier is positioning this, not throwing back arguments or threats or talking about how terrible the administration is in the U.S. and so on. No, she's looking at what can we do, what should we have done, and what can we do going forward, including building a fund to take advantage of the resources that we should be developing, but have been frustrated in doing so.
Right on. I find it so interesting that you reference the whole reality of Canada. We've got a whole series of politicians that are kind of genuflecting now as kind of the Captain Canadas, and yet they have not, like they demand free trade with the United States, but we don't even have free trade in our country. I mean, this is so ironic. You can't even make this up. So Rob, going to you then, practically, do you export a lot of your product to other provinces, or is it easier to export to the United States? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So our products don't really leave the province until they're under load or protecting something that's being shipped somewhere else. So it's the customer base that's shipping out of province or out of country, not necessarily us. But based on what I've seen in Manitoba over my career, I'm going to say it's a 60-40 split. 60% of it's going into the U.S. and 40% of it's staying in Canada, if you wanted sort of a rough guess.
Okay, very interesting.
It's a pretty significant portion, and again, like it's not like there is an easily found alternative to that 60%. If what's going into the U.S. were to stop, it's not like we would find an alternative market, or that my customers would find an alternative market. I don't believe they would.
So, Marco, do you find it pretty ironic that we've got a scurry of politicians reacting to this threat finally, and we're actually beginning to talk about, what is it again, diversifying our exports, actually building maybe even some pipelines, despite the objections of the Premier of Quebec? I mean, finally, we're talking about issues that have been, we know that Canada's got a massive productivity problem and a declining standard of living. Is this give you hope that we're going to finally get on with these cobwebs and clean it up?
Pierre Elliott Trudeau used to say that being Canada was like being a mouse sleeping next to an elephant, right? The idea is that there isn't a hell of a lot that the Americans can do without having some sort of effect on Canada, and here is probably the best example. we haven't talked about security and the border for a long time. In fact, we kind of avoided talking about security while we were talking about foreign interference in all sorts of institutions in the country, for example. And in less than 3 days after Trump won the election, we were already talking about security and borders and what have you. It took years for the prime minister and his government to include the Islamic the Islamic Revolutionary Guard from Iran on a list of terrorist organizations. Years and years, and within 5 minutes after a phone call with President Trump, we now have all the narco traffic cartels on the same list, literally within minutes. So what Trump is doing is going to have and is having a tremendous effect on the conversations in Canada. And it's going to make us confront realities which we have been working very hard at looking away from. Take, for example, in Canada, it's kind of cute to say that, and kind of trendy to say, buy local, right? We love to say that, and we think that's nice. And it is, because Canadians love to be nice. But that's exactly what Trump is doing. He's encouraging Americans to buy local. To buy local is to say, protect your local community. The issue really is, what exactly is local? Is local your city, your neighborhood, your county, your province, your country? Trump is decided that buy local means the entire United States, but it's no different. So this is going to shock maybe some of our viewers here, but if you are one of those strong proponents of buying local, you're really on the same philosophical side as Donald Trump. And what we don't have in the country, in spite of the sort of negative reactions and in some ways over-the-top reactions against the threat of tariffs, is besides maybe Danielle Smith, I have not seen strong positions defending and upholding the principles of free trade in Canada. And so one of the things that we need to do is really go back to the books, dust them off, find Smith and all the great economists who argued in favor of trade, and become reacquainted with these ideas.
All right. So there's Daniel Smith talking with President Donald Trump at, I believe it's Mar-a-Lago in Florida, trying to bring some type of relationship to bear here. Does it concern you? It seems like our relationships with the administration are kind of frayed. I know that in the aftermath of the election, there were some pretty, incisive comments made again by the Trudeau administration that, well, it's a pity that the other side didn't win. Were those wise kind of points to make? I mean, I think that we've got to work with the administration, whoever's in there. What do you think, Rob and Ron?
To say the comments were foolish is probably an understatement. Politicians are supposed to be politicians for a reason, and one of the things that politicians should know what to do is when to say things and when not to. It's why I'm not a politician.
Okay.
I wouldn't make it. But I mean, like to go back to the mouse and elephant analogy that Marco threw out there, and maybe circling a little bit back to something you said, Dave. Like I don't think this has anything to do with the border security or fentanyl. This is all about softening up other parts of the world, and Mr. Trump is simply showing the rest of the world that if he's prepared to do something like this to what you could consider his best friend from a country to country perspective, that if you're not the best friend, imagine what might happen to you. So yeah. I think this is a softening play as much as it is anything else, and Canada just kind of happens to be in the way.
Okay, so just to clarify, it's a softening play in the sense that they're beginning with their continental, quote, friends and partners as a way to signal to other people, like, say, in Europe or Asia, that you better watch out. Is that what you're getting at?
Correct. I mean, Europe in particular, which has a true trading deficit with the U.S., whereas Canada, I mean, I've looked at the numbers. We are the only country where you can argue there isn't a massive deficit, and particularly when you take oil out of the mix. So, and I mean, Mr. Trump would not be, he'd be aware of those numbers. It's not like he hasn't been showing these things. So I mean,
Okay.
this is simply a tactic to try and soften up Europe, and it's a tactic to continue to work away at China. They've now got their tariff with China up to 35%. So it just went from 25 to 35. You would anticipate that at some point that might go up some more.
Okay.
To throw another sports analogy into the mix here in this conversation. If you were to think of a football game and go back to 2006, and this is China versus the U.S., the score would be 45-3 for the U.S. And if you fast forward to today, the score would be 50-40. So China's caught up a lot. And so, if you're the coach of Team USA at this stage, you would be saying much different things to your team than you would be when you were up 45-3. And so I think that's what we're seeing.
So we're seeing, if I continue the analogy of hockey pucks, teenagers, mice, and I'll do the analogy of 3D chess here, in the sense that you're citing, Rob, kind of a larger geopolitical picture where the United States is saying, wait a sec, where is this going in terms of larger global international trade? And we need kind of a reset. And I think there's some good evidence to point in that direction if we read certainly those papers that Ron Koslowsky mentioned. So good point. What about you? What do you say, Ron?
Well, no, I absolutely agree with the assessment that this is it's the art of the deal, right? It's a way of softening up other countries to be more amenable to bending to the U.S. in terms of trade policy and so on. Let's keep another thing in mind, and maybe to the point that Rob was getting at as well, is politicians in Canada, I think, have called names and have put up blustering comments. Almost, it seems, and maybe I'm a little bit jaundiced, but it seems to me that it's been more a show for their political voting base and an attempt to maintain an air that they're here to defend Canada. But it's more about keeping their own political hot seat from the chair.
Mm-hmm.
And not enough about really truly doing the kind of hard work and diplomatic work and the honest discussion that is in the best interest of Canada. So I think that's another piece behind the puzzle. And again, I think it's really disingenuous of other premiers to call Danielle Smith, not in the interest of Canada and wanting her to use oil as a weapon, if you will, when Alberta fundamentally, and talk about Quebec and pipelines and so on, fundamentally Alberta contributes how many billions of dollars to other provinces out east, especially Quebec, only to have them frustrate any efforts to get the oil and the gas to markets outside of Alberta. So to me, there's a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of finger pointing, which is misguided. And I think, again, this is an opportunity for, I think, hopefully the average person in Canada will begin to understand that you don't just listen to our mainstream media who have a very, very narrow take on this. And they do some of their own research and think more seriously about all the different elements that we need to do in order to become independent. I think Canada needs to become independent, like Australia or other countries that have not had the luxury of living next to the elephant. But we have to get again to the point that Mark was making. We have to get to a point where we can become independent, and that's going to take hard work, and it's going to take a whole bunch of strong leadership, and it's going to take voters that are willing to not just believe everything they're told, but actually check it out and do some serious thinking about sacrificing for the sake of our country now, but also for our young people going forward.
Right on. Yeah, this is a very important time in Canada's history. So I think you're really issuing a very powerful challenge, Ron, that our politicians not play political short-term games, but we actually govern in the interest of this country. As for example, it's interesting. I notice Doug Ford has obviously called an election as he puts on a cap, said, Canada's not for sale. And where is that cap made? It's made in China. So go figure. I've got some questions here. Larry Archer makes the point, Not since the building of Canada's national railway has Canada had a viable business vision and a leader to deliver that needs to get moving forward, for example, in resource development. Well said, Larry. So we've got a situation here where let's get with the basics. Let's get with the program. Let's grow the pie, prosperity all the way. And we've got a lot of work to do. That's a key theme here, isn't it? So I am talking with a wonderful panel about the state of Canada today, given the kind of challenges we face. Keep those questions coming and comments. We really appreciate it. I know Prairie said, another analogy, let's don't put our eggs into one basket. Very, very important. And yeah, how can we do that and export to other nations if we have a very interesting diplomatic strategy? And I'm going to turn to you, Marco, and that has to do with our main trading allies beyond the United States. And it seems like our government has the incredible, unique proclivity of being able to put our foot in the mouth when it comes to our relationships with key countries, whether it's China or India. What are your observations, Marco, from a policy point of view?
Yeah, this is this is in part kind of what we were talking about earlier about not minding one's training and honing one's skills for the competition, right? Our prime minister, for example, has completely destroyed the large part of the potential of the relationship that we have with India. Previous prime ministers from Jacques Chrétien onward have worked very hard at forging a close relationship with India, which happens to be the largest democracy in the world, the fastest growing economy in the world. And one of the things, they want everything. They need more energy, they need more minerals, they need more food. And Canada happens to be in a privileged position to sell them foodstuffs, particularly from Western Canada. Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba have very strong partnerships with India to export many of the foodstuffs. Now, that has not been destroyed. I don't mean to imply that it has been destroyed, but what has been destroyed is the potential for growth and for more by picking a fight with the Prime Minister of India and with interests in India. The Prime Minister has essentially put a cap on the potential for growth that Canada has. And he doesn't seem to be caring all that much, considering that the parts of the country that are most affected by the fight with India are Western interests. You know, we don't sell manufactured vehicles to India. We don't sell large amounts of maple syrup or lobster to India, but we sell canola, we sell wheat, we sell meats, we sell lots of stuff that are produced in the West. So that's, you know, an enormous market. India, then China, of course, that was also completely botched in several different instances. Also one of the largest markets in the world. Combined, China and India are, you know, 45, nearly half of the population of the world. And we now, of course, pick a fight with the United States, which is, you know, so now we have 3 of the 4 or 5 largest economies in the world that we're chafing against. That's potentially a suicide. If you were running a business, pick any business, and your third largest customers are completely alienated, you're going to be in trouble. And that's where we are. So from the point of view of diplomacy, we have botched this thing 16 ways from Sunday.
Okay, so from a policy point of view, again, we've got more work to do as we try to rebuild those international relationships. And we all agree we need to diversify our economy, and we have lots of opportunities. I just cited one of the headlines is that Alberta is on a trade mission in Tokyo right now, talking about how do we get more LNG. And we've done everything we can as a federal government to stop resource development. In fact, there is a war on Canadian oil and gas in this country. So how does that serve the development of our economy? Like, I mean, this is just a stunning moment where we are undermining the not just the productivity, but the whole standard of living of Canadians. Do you notice this in your business, Rob? Like if there's going to be there's a myriad of carbon taxes on energy.
Yeah.
Do you notice that in your work, in your business?
Yeah, and the carbon tax is a real, it's the true head scratcher. And we received checks back this year for carbon tax payments dating back to, I think, 2019, and they related to the employee headcount we had in each of those years. I mean, we sat down as a team and tried to actually figure out how the government came up with the number they sent us, but
That's fascinating. According to head count, the number of employees you have.
Yeah.
So theoretically, if you have more employees, you pay more tax.
Well, but I mean, like there was one year where we had a number of temporary employees, and so those were included. Like the way that the government calculated this thing and doled out all this money was sort of haphazard, and it just seems to be the way our government runs these days. It's all of a sudden you get a check, and you're like, "Why am I getting this check?" Like and there's no explanation with it. They just seem to be handing out money to try and get votes, and there's no foresight to anything they're doing.
Wow. What do you think, Ron? I mean, you work with a myriad of businesses trying to improve exporting. What's the big impediment to Canada moving forward beyond what you mentioned?
Well, I mean, the carbon tax was again, apart from the payroll tax, the carbon tax is one of those hated things that depending on what you did was absolutely counterproductive. And not only that, as Rob was saying, the federal government has told us all, don't worry, you're going to get more back that you pay. And they're going to, now Carney is talking about, we're going to find a different way of finding that money. Well, it's all going to end up back out of our own pockets at the end of the day. But that aside, I mean, it's got us into a financial mess as a country. And when you add the provincial and the federal debt, I mean, our debt to GDP ratio is if you add everything together, it's looking very weak compared to other places. We've allowed over the last few years way more immigration without the skills focus that we used to have. That's created huge problems for us, as we all know, with the housing, social services, and our culture even.
Yeah.
We've got excessive regulations, suffocating, I would say, regulations and processes that prevent, even if you could produce oil and gas or set up a new mine, it takes you 15 to 20 years to get through all the hoops to do that. Infrastructure has not been addressed. And we got government expansion. How many federal employees have been hired in the last few years with less and less efficiency in total? And so, charge us carbon tax and then spend half of it on bureaucracy to give us back our money without any impact on the environment. So some of that has been, the waste, and we need a DOGE, if you will, in Canada I'm sure there's a ton of opportunity to make some savings over there. But you can go education, healthcare, crime, justice system, all these things play into the business environment that we end up either paying for or living under. And we compete infrastructure or country or economy with another country. And our infrastructure, broadly defined as the business environment, needs to become way more competitive along that to make us self-sufficient.
Okay, so there again is that theme that we've got to, using the hockey metaphor, pull up our socks and get back in the game and become competitive. Because when you think of it, Canada has everything going for it in terms of, natural resources, all kinds of opportunity, but we've frittered away. We've mismanaged that competitive advantage. Instead of being the most prosperous free country in the world, we are a low performer. We are just really not performing. And so this is, again, the call for, frankly, a reset for Canada so we can go out and, make this Canada get moving again. It seems to be the theme of the day, isn't it?
I want to just emphasize one thing. I'm actually somewhat positive in spite of everything I've said. I think, there is nothing like an alcoholic coming to the conclusion that, I need help and I need to change the way I'm doing things.
Oh,
and I think that's another analogy, but I think we needed that that sort of self-declaration. And I'm just hoping more people get the fact that we can't just blame the Americans, but we have to look at ourselves now and take this as an opportunity. Life goes in cycles for economies and countries. Hard times make good people make good times. Good times probably end up creating weak people, and then weak people make hard times. It's like a product development cycle. We need to make sure we're continually avoiding that last part of that cycle. And I think there are some things we can do, and hopefully we have the capacity to do once we get our government figured out at the national level, which is another shame, but I won't go there now.
That's great. What do you say, Marco? Or Rob?
I have a friend who likes to say that we need to get the basics right. And I think that applies here fundamentally. Let's remember how this country got put together. This country got put together for the purposes of putting 4 colonies together so that goods and services could move more easily among them. And in large part is the very foundation of what then became Western Canada. Build this train line all the way to the Pacific so that we could move goods and services. There was no CBC at the time telling us who we were or how to be, or fascinated with sexual identity and race and all those things. That even though they keep telling us that that is a fundamental aspect of being Canadian, I'd like to think that it is not. None of the founders mention any of that. It's not in any of our founding documents. It's not part of our Constitution. The fundamental idea of creating British North America was to have a British nationality in North America that could trade and move goods from one end to the other. We have essentially not fulfilled that promise because we have all these tariffs inside the country. So if we want to get the basics right and we want to preach to the world, especially to our southern cousins, that we are pro-free trade and we are great defenders of free trade, I am with Ron on that one. I'm fairly optimistic that there's great opportunities here for rethinking who we are. Not reinventing, but simply going back to the basics and open up our interprovincial borders and have full commerce within our borders, get good at it before we start preaching it to the world.
That sounds like a great vision, Marco, and a great reminder of the vision of our founding leaders, including Sir John A. Macdonald, who talked very much about that vision. And so we need to renew that and learn from history here. This says, this is all common sense. This is from human number 4. This is all common sense, but the East is still in love with the idea of Trudeau and the fear of conservatives. How do you change these attitudes? Well, I can't speak to the party election thing, but I think one of the things I always marvel at when it comes to that question is just frankly how people have forgotten our history. We don't realize how much within our Constitution there's a commitment to free trade, but it's like our governing elites have frankly betrayed the Canadian people because we don't have free trade in this country in the first place. It's really quite ironic, isn't it? So it's all part of that call to renew, isn't it?
No, I think, David, it's an interesting point about the attitudes of other people. By the way, I do think that a lot of people in Eastern Canada have even woken up to the fact that there is something rotten in the state of Canada over the past number of years. But I think beyond that, the media has changed. We saw what happened in the U.S. Mainstream media has passed its best before date and is no longer as relevant as the truth teller of what's right. They provide you with very, very quick sound bites that are unfortunately almost always supportive of government. In fact, when you're paid by government, it's very hard not to be. And yet modern media, such as shows like this, I think are in long form where you actually get to understand a little more deeply what the issues are and what the solutions are. I think are going to pave the way for more and more Canadians to see their way through the Laurentian elites, if you will. And so I'm hopeful that will change in Canada as it did in the U.S.
I agree. So, Rob, as you look to the future, do you see this truly as an opportunity for a reset in Canada? Are you more pessimistic or optimistic in your mind?
I think I would agree with Ron from a lot of perspectives. I mean, from an optimistic perspective, I feel like what we're going through is something that was inevitable. It's going to be now or later, and I think it's easier to deal with now. If we deal with it later, and no matter how you describe later, our debt will be higher, our deficits will be higher. There'll be more people working for government. I think the sooner that we tackle these problems, the better. And I mean, and to the comments about this form of communication versus the media, I feel like anytime a left-leaning party, and it doesn't matter what country you're in, you can take Canada and the U.S. out of the mix and pick Australia and New Zealand. It doesn't matter. The policies on the left, they dissolve. If you go over 5 minutes of conversation about any policy on the left, the communication breaks down because there's no substance there. There's nothing to talk about. You can bring up a graph or a chart, and the whole argument just gets blown out of the water. So there's got to be quite a bit of fear on that side of the political aisle to this kind of communication, because they can't get in the arena. They can't handle the fight.
Yeah. So speaking of that, and I think you make some very good points that you really have to have places of real debate and getting at the real policies that are being proposed. And a lot of these policies are not policies, they're political misses that don't work. So I'll just give you one illustration, and I want to talk about Parliament. My understanding is that the last 10 years, $1.3 trillion have left Canada to other countries, particularly the United States. And we all know this anecdotally. We've heard all kinds of Canadians, particularly entrepreneurs, just leaving the country. And it's been a steady torrent of people doing this. Does this concern you, gentlemen, as you look at Canada?
Yeah,
so I'll jump in. So, it's sort of a quantity quantity over quality. I mean, so we're bringing in a lot of people, but we're losing people. But are the people that are coming in able to contribute to the same extent to the economy right off the hop that the people leaving were contributing? And I think it's the conclusion would be clear. It's almost impossible. It takes time to ramp up. If you were to toss me into a new economy, I wouldn't do well right off the hop. It would take me a number of years to kind of find my footing. And so I think what's happening, some of our best. So it's yes, our population's growing, and I suppose that's helping our GDP numbers, but we're losing some people in the process that are going to be really difficult to replace.
We really are.
Yeah.
So in that context, I am shocked. I guess I'm going to ask you, Marco, first, that our Parliament, when there's so much work to be done, our Parliament, our federal national Parliament, is on pause button. It's prorogued. Does that make any sense?
No, it doesn't. And of course, it makes sense for the people who have done it. And let's face it, it's a completely partisan arrangement, right? The idea of stopping Parliament while the party in power sorts itself out in terms of its leadership and finds some footing to organize itself for an election. That's the whole idea. And you can hardly blame a party for doing that because they're trying to survive. But what is at stake is that we have multiple crises intersecting, and pausing Parliament at the time when we have all these multiple crises intersecting is really bad for the country. It might be good for the party in power, but it's really bad for the country. So, for example, the Prime Minister just agreed to put all these cartels on a list of terrorist organizations. That actually, wouldn't it be great if Parliament actually debated that? There are legal issues about what is a terrorist and whether, you know, cartel thugs actually respond to the definition in the legislation, in the Canadian legislation. It does apparently in the American, but does it fit with the Canadian legislation? Some people would say that it does not, even though they are in favor of doing it. So those are things that Parliament should be debating. We should be debating tariffs. We should be debating free trade. We should be debating issues of national security and Canada's place in the world. But instead, we are completely left to the margins. And when I say we, I mean Canadian citizens and the larger public in the country. Unable to make their voices heard because their elected officials and the people we have sent to Ottawa to debate these things are basically locked out of the building.
So in that regard, I think what you're underlining is very important. Not only do we have important policy work to pull up our socks, our institutions, including democratic institutions like Parliament, really need to be refreshed. I mean, this is a very important time. I mean, I look back through history in so many cases where, for example, during World War II, the British Parliament sat all the time. And these were important forums where people had a voice. The people's house needs to be heard more than ever, and yet it's silent. This is the irony and I think the hypocrisy of our situation. This is truly a national crisis of sorts, is it not? I mean, am I being too dramatic? I mean, this is truly a national crisis. This is not a normal time.
It's probably a little bit worse considering that the prime minister who has decided he's going to take the reins of this thing is, first of all, a lame duck prime minister. I don't mean that in a personal way.
No.
He simply, his own party has kind of disavowed him. He no longer has the confidence, not just not the confidence of the House, but he does not have the confidence of his own caucus. So that's a worrisome development. But what is worse is that the prime minister has no business acumen and no diplomatic acumen at the time when those two things are the most important skills necessary, right? He has no idea of how an economy works. Again, I don't mean that in a personal way, but somebody who expects budgets to balance themselves and isn't worried about monetary policy, et cetera, is not the person that the country needs to be in charge at the time when we have this particular type of crisis.
Yeah, in addition to that, I would say that we know from history and we know from comments that our prime minister has made in the past that he has been very disregarding of the Trump administration, and that there is absolutely zero love between the two of them. So in addition to being out of order, I've wondered myself what would have happened had we had a different leader, and whether or not we would be in the same kind of a negotiating. I'm sure there'd be negotiations for sure, but I kind of think we might be in a bit of a better position even with a different leader in place, given the animosity between the two of them. Which again goes to the point where you're supposed to represent Canada. You're supposed to represent the best interests of our country, not your own political image or the ideology that you want to foist on other people.
Yeah, and personalities matter, right?
Yeah.
People who get along with Trump are more likely to get a slightly better ear about the things. We heard him say that, well, maybe I won't impose tariffs on Italy because he really likes Giorgia Meloni. I mean, he's only saying that tongue in cheek, but he's half serious about it because he has a personal relationship with her. And a great deal of the diplomatic work is about those relationships.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and I think if Pierre had been in power, we wouldn't be faced with this. I mean, I think about it from a strategic perspective. Really, the problem the U.S. has is Mexico. That's a much bigger issue than Canada. And I think that if you were strictly threatening a 25% tariff on Mexico and leaving Canada out of the mix, I think that you could have got more concessions or could continue to get more concessions out of Mexico if you basically had both of your guns trained on them. So I think that the fact that he chose to go after both countries is really partly just a dislike of Trudeau, and hey, well, let's throw those guys into the mix too. But if we had proper leadership, I don't think we would be in this mess.
Okay, so this is a very interesting point. So leadership matters, relationships matters. I certainly think of the kind of relationship, and I don't mean this in any partisan way, that the extraordinary relationship between the late Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and certainly the late President Ronald Reagan certainly made a difference, at least from what I gathered from many people involved in that. I have some comments, one of which is Prairie says, to continue the analogy, sharpen up them skates. Well said. Angela says, if they taught real history, the games would halt. Well said. So history matters, facts matter. And speaking of facts, as we get back towards the tail end of our engaging conversation here today with our wonderful panel and audience, I just wanted to highlight something. And that is a paper that Ron highlighted, and that was a interesting paper. It's under the name Hudson Bay Capital. It's called A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. And of course, this was done back in November 2024, not that long ago. And it's by Stephen Miran. He's a senior strategist there, but he is now, I believe, the chair of the American Council of Economic Advisors, so a very important Trump appointee. And I want to just highlight on page 23, for those of people who do read still, it's very interesting, a set of questions that the paper posits. And it goes like this, and I just want to highlight it to you because I think it gives a little bit of a flavor about what's happening. And they're talking about trade relationships and the whole theme of fairness. And he posits these questions. Maybe the U.S. wants to discriminate in terms of trade with other nations based on a number of questions, including, does the nation apply similar tariff rates to their imports from the U.S. as America does on their exports here? It's a very interesting question because we all believe, quote, in free trade, but is it fair trade when another nation applies tariffs? Of course, Adam Smith spoke to that and said, no, that's not free trade. That's nonsense. Another question, does the nation have a history of suppressing its currency, e.g. China, for instance via the accumulation of excessive quantities of foreign exchange reserves? Anyways, this is complex stuff and it gets into other questions. But one of them is, does the nation respect American intellectual property rights? And we know that in the age of industrial espionage, this is a big deal. The IP, or intellectual property, represents kind of the family jewels of your future standard of living. And there's a lot of other questions regarding border security. And another one is, does the nation pay its NATO obligations in full? Now, we know that Canada, let's be blunt, is a NATO freeloader. And this has been ignored for years. And it seems to me that we've got a major reset coming from the Trump administration saying, not only do we want to make sure that your borders are secure, we want to make sure you're a full partner when it comes to security, no longer this free ride in terms of defense arrangements. This sounds, again, going back to the teenage metaphor, a call for Canada to wake up and grow up at the same time. Am I being too dramatic about this? Who wants to tackle that one?
Yeah,
I think in part is what the three of us have been saying in slightly different ways, but in very similar ways, that there is a greater plan afoot, and that it is spelled out right there, and that if we don't get with the program, if we keep playing a different game than the game that they're playing, we are sure going to lose. I'm not suggesting that even if we were playing the same game, we could win this, because we cannot. The American economy is so far larger and more powerful than ours that if we got into this silly war with them full throttle, we could not win. But the reality is, if we have any chance of winning at all, and any chance of understanding what is going on, we need to understand what the game is. And Miran's paper kind of explains what the game is.
I think it does, indeed. Any other comments?
Well, go ahead, Bob. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the conversations surrounding Greenland and Panama are accidental, and I don't think that they relate entirely to Trump. I think that those things have been looked at for a period of time now by the Americans, and they have concerns about their national security, and they should. And a lot of what you're seeing happen now is things that they've known for a while and have been scared to act upon. But now you've put a leader in place that isn't scared to act and is trying to make up for lost time. And so I think the obligation of Canada and the other NATO countries to step up and be part of the solution is critical to the Americans. And so I think they're going to do what they have to try and get us all to kind of step up and start rowing the boat with them.
I think you're right, Rob. It's interesting on the note of Greenland and Panama. You may have noticed some very interesting announcements. The country that is kind of has that protectorate relationship with Greenland is, of course, Denmark. And Denmark has agreed to a much larger military presence in Greenland, including no foreign presence of other parties on that continent. Is almost like an American reassertion of what's called the Monroe Doctrine. And in Panama, we know that there's been an agreement now that Panama said there will be no foreign parties at the either end of the Panama Canal, namely Chinese parties and companies trying to buy up those facilities, as well as a cease of all money laundering operations there. So there's a pattern now of getting results as the United States reasserts its security needs. So, Ron, you were going to say a comment?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. Over the years, I've heard people, when asked to define Canada as being, well, we're not like the Americans. And I think that's been, that kind of sentiment, that kind of attitude is what the average, many people in America know about us. And now it's coming to hurt us in a bit. But I think on a positive note, Canada has a great history to be proud of. We came in as people of various countries as immigrants. We came into a country. We used what I would call a relatively enlightened approach to encountering others who were less developed with technology, with economics, and so on. And you compare our history with other histories of other countries and what they've done. And how they've treated people. I think we have a lot to be proud of, in spite of the protestations against that. And we have a history of flourishing and advancement with individual rights, property rights, the rule of law, and limited government. These are things, as was said before, these are the core foundations of what made us successful. And those things can be resurrected again. And I really think that we need to be proud of our country. And then there's no better way to be proud of your country than if you feel your country is going in the right direction with the right leadership.
Well said. So as we wind up our conversation today, and it's been a tremendous conversation, I very much appreciated it, is I want to ask each of you briefly if there's one or two key things we need to do to move Canada forward now at this juncture in our history. What would that be? Marco, do you want to go first?
Yes. Right off the bat, I would say we need to get back to the basics about who we are and what we want to be as a country. We need to get back to the fundamental values and truths that our parents and grandparents knew to be true. And that implies essentially moving away and getting rid of this woke culture that is essentially infected our way of thinking.
Well said. Rob?
Yeah, I'm going to say workforce participation. I think that the percentage of the population that's involved in a 40-hour work week is not what it used to be, and that people need a sense of purpose. And so I think that workforce participation in general, and also the percentage between public sector and private sector, that there needs to be recalibration. We're going to need to see less people in the public sector and more in the private sector.
Well said. Let's get back to work. What about you, Ron?
Well, I agree with all of that, but I would actually take it. There's so many things, and you look at what the U.S. is doing to try to bring that country back again. There's so many things that that I mentioned before that we have to address, and what I think we need to do is with leadership of governments and key stakeholders, we have to get our heads together. We have to build a strategy in a variety of these different areas. Whether it's finances, immigration, productivity, energy, bureaucracy, etc. We need a strategy, an industrial strategy, or a business strategy, if you will, that will clear up some of the past problems that we've run into, and that will allow us to move forward and develop our own independence.
Well said. Well, this has been a far-reaching conversation, and I'm so grateful for all of your insights, Ron, Rob, and Marco, and our audience. Thank you for your participation. Canada is an incredible nation. We're all very proud of it, and we love our country. So let's work together to rebuild and renew this country during this challenging time. And we certainly appreciate all your comments, and make sure you like it. Pass this on to your friends, your family, as we pass the word on that this should be an opportunity to build and renew this country so that we don't go quietly into the night. So on that note, I want to thank everybody. And I also want to wish you all the best during this next week. And please be sure to join us on the live version of Leaders, and make sure you also pay attention to those releases of our wonderful programs as we talk about these important issues. So thanks again for your participation, and have a terrific week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.